Thank you for joining us today for Conversations with AARP in the Virgin Islands. I'm Troy Deshabere-Schuster, State Director of AARP in this territory, and I welcome you to this discussion about the Americans with Disabilities Act and its impact on the territory. AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization dedicated to empowering Americans 50 plus to choose how they live as they age. With nearly 38 million members and offices in every state, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the United States Virgin Islands, AARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters most to families, with a focus on health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. The AARP Livable Communities Initiative helps advance the efforts of neighborhoods, towns, cities, counties, rural areas, and entire states to be livable for people of all ages, in addition to engaging and providing support at the national, state, and local levels. AARP develops resources for use and sharing by elected officials, local leaders, municipal staff, and is vested in making communities more livable for residents, including those with disabilities. Today, we will hear from Julien Henley, the Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator at the Office of the Governor. We will discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act and its impact on the territory, also discussing how this law can provide opportunities for Virgin Islands visitors and residents of all ages to participate in community life. So, Julien, good day.
Good day, sir.
Great to have you on the show again. This is now your second appearance with us to discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so I know you have a lot to share with us today.
You got it. Definitely, I do.
Great. So tell us, what is your role as the ADA coordinator in the Office of the Governor?
Well, my role is to make sure that one, the government is providing access to all services that we have in the government, not just physical access, but also electronic access. So my hope is to make sure that as a government, that persons can reach services in whatever means that they should, whatever is being provided for persons without disabilities, that they're being provided for persons with disabilities.
And so your role is territorial, I would imagine. And are you like sort of the watchdog, if I may use that term, looking to make sure that the law is enforced here and that people with disabilities have all that they need?
Exactly. So I have to. It is territorial, and I have to make sure that even for complaints or things that a person might feel that is best practice, they would still contact my office, whether it's within the government or outside of the government. As a person representing those individuals, they do call, they do ask for services, they do seek information to better their lives. So when you add that list outside of the government, then you have an extremely long list of persons who want life to be much better than what it is.
And so this year, the Virgin Islands celebrated the Americans with Disabilities Act, its 32nd anniversary. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that celebration and what was discussed, what happened during that celebration recently?
Well, that celebration was great because one of the things I wanted to expose was not just me getting up and talking to individuals and saying, oh, yeah, we accomplished this thing, to really bring forward all the agencies outside of the ADA office to show the public and the territory that there are a lot of persons advocating, working towards, accomplishing, and have programs in place to empower persons with disabilities to go out and be that catalyst to want to go and seek these services. Not always we're trying to fit them in or bring them in. We want them to be the aggressor and to empower them in knowing that AARP and others do provide advocacy and hard work on their behalf.
Yes, and we will talk a little bit about the advocacy of AARP regarding persons with disabilities. We have a lot to discuss with that. But going back again to the Americans with Disabilities Act, what has changed here in the Virgin Islands since the passage of that law? Can you give us just a brief overview of what has changed here in the territory?
It's just amazing to see all that we have done. We've started with sidewalks. We've made sidewalks more accessible. There's APS automated pedestrian signaling, the buttons that persons who might be deaf or blind who needs to cross and need that signaling or the cheeping sound to tell them it's okay to cross. We have in place accessible transportation, which wasn't available, like Bytran, to be able to pick persons up with disabilities and other services that is provided in the territory. We also have, when you look at your airport, the access to services. You look at our grocery stores. Before grocery stores, when you go in the aisle with one card, someone had to reverse because the aisles was too narrow. All of those things and all those changes have been done because of the American with Disability Act, making sure that we step up into making even our beaches. Now we're making our beaches accessible. We're working on getting our theaters. They are more accessible. They have accessibility to a level in which they can provide services to persons with even other types of disabilities. So that list can go on and on. We have done a whole lot as a government, but there's still work to be done as we rebuild after these Cat 5s. That's where you have to get that watchful eye to making sure that whatever you build is built for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And you need to make sure that it's inclined with the ADA.
And while a lot of good has come about as a result of the law here in this territory, this federal law, there is still a lot of work to be done. And we
Yes.
continue to work on that. One thing that's been of great concern across the country for people who are visually impaired are these electric automobiles, right? And now we're getting more of them in the Virgin Islands. The VI government just acquired more than 20 Tesla electric automobiles. And people who are visually impaired are very concerned because they cannot hear a motor. They're listening for the sound of car engines as they're walking in the streets and trying to cross the streets. And with the Teslas, they can't hear. Has there been any discussion that you know of anywhere across the country regarding this predicament, and how is that going to be solved for people who are visually impaired?
Well, that's the reason why having APS buttons, the automated pedestrian signaling, is so important, because that automation actually helps a person who's visually impaired to be able to press a button. All traffic stop on all ends, and it's a cheaping sound that this person would hear to tell them it's fine, it's okay to cross the street. However, it's not every intersection will have something like that, and so it is a challenge. It is a concern. It's just you follow, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you trying to find the guidance that is being established, because although it is a concern, it once again, it's not a violation. So you need to come up now. How do you make sure that persons with disabilities, although it's a best practice, it's not infringing on those individuals' abilities to live independently? So it is something that's going to be on the table, and it's going to take some work to get straightened out.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting to see how this unfolds,
Yes.
not only across the country, but all over the world, because more and more electric automobiles are available and Tesla is becoming more available. And it's a great automobile and very necessary to cut down on carbon emissions. But then for those who are visually impaired, it presents interesting challenges. Here in the Virgin Islands recently, AARP advocated for complete streets policy.
Yes.
Nationally, AARP is a charter member of the National Complete Streets Coalition, and we've been advocating for complete streets policy in every state and municipality across the United States and in the territories of Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and now it is law in this territory. And one of the most important features of Complete Streets is the development of the Complete Streets Task Force within the Department of Public Works. A group of concerned individuals, many with particular skills regarding disabilities and engineering, et cetera. And this task force is established to look at every time a road is being repaired or a new road constructed to make sure that the street is as complete as feasible. So allow me to explain what I mean when I say complete as feasible. A true complete street will have sidewalks that are well maintained and ADA accessible for persons with disabilities. We'll have crosswalks that are properly marked, proper traffic lights to stop traffic so that people can cross. A complete street will also have running lanes constructed and delineated within the street itself, and biking lanes for those who are on bicycles. And this helps to keep the sidewalks safe and helps keeps bikers and runners safe, etc. But we realize that especially in a territory like this where a lot of the roads are so very narrow, we can't have sidewalks and running lanes and biking lanes on every street. So again, where feasible. But sidewalks are of great concern. That's number one priority. And yesterday here in St. Croix, I was driving into Christiansted, and I noticed that there were a lot of cars parked on a sidewalk, on top of the sidewalk. And these cars are parked on top of the sidewalk every day. And
Yes.
there is no enforcement. No, they're not getting tickets. Nobody is towing these automobiles. They're parked on top of the sidewalk every day. And yesterday, in particular, there was an older gentleman in a motorized wheelchair, an electric wheelchair, and he was forced to ride in his wheelchair in the street because there was no way for him to get onto the side. Nobody, not a pedestrian, certainly nobody in a wheelchair, nobody can get onto that sidewalk. There were a row of about maybe 10 automobiles parked on top of the sidewalk, back to front, end to end. And so this is a real danger, right? A real danger. We're hearing more and more people being knocked down in the roads, killed in our streets. Pedestrians some of them aren't following the rules. Most of the time, drivers aren't following the rules. And if I may digress for a moment, I came to realize that a lot of motorists in the Virgin Islands, I would probably say the majority, don't realize that when you see somebody even standing at a crosswalk, waiting to cross, the traffic is supposed to stop. You
Yes.
don't just stop for the pedestrian when they're in the crosswalk. It's when
Yes.
you see them attempting to cross, you
Correct.
must stop. And that is the law here in this territory, right?
And that is an area that I think we need to have public announcements. We need to have more enforcement and education in making sure that that persons in the community, and especially those who drive and traverse in the community, that they know the importance of their rights. We do have situations like what you talk about in St. Croix. As you know, I'm an individual that's in a manual wheelchair, and it is a concern even when I'm in St. Croix, because then I have to traverse in the street, and not only because cars are parked in the street. If you count the amount of light poles, the electric poles that's in the sidewalk, that is an amazing amount of poles that was, for whatever reason, they thought that that's where they belonged. And
Yes.
I'm not sure it's where they could move the uh, the those poles off. I know that there's a lot of studies and information that's being shared to correct that problem.
Mhm.
But we also have the problem in Frederickstead. We have, and this is why even with complete streets, that it's important for us to really not just know that the law is that you should be involved, is that you mandate that you be involved. Because when a sidewalk is built, there's a lot of scientific reasons, every aspect of a sidewalk. You could write a story about a sidewalk and then the crosswalk that comes along. All of those are connecting signals that a person who is blind or a person who's not blind has the ability to be able to know that this was built with all the whistles and bells to keep me safe.
Right.
And so when you look at the height of a sidewalk, if a sidewalk is 6 inches high and it's only 5 feet wide, then you're not in compliance, because then it should be 1 per 12. So things like that is, for me, it goes as an ADA coordinator and know a person who understands the ADA specs and all of that. It's important for us to have, even my office, to making sure that we're working with AARP and other agencies, nonprofits or whoever, for them to better understand the way parallel curve cuts will be working, or just curve cuts, period. Where do you put the APS buttons? You can't put them in the curve cut, because then I can't enter the curve cut and turn left or right. How do you fix the flares that helps me to turn left or right? All those things are things that was upgraded since the 2010 ADA came to fruition. They have now improved those measurements, so you don't have trip zones when you turn left or right. So there's a lot of things that we need to do better. And once you build these sidewalks, they're there for 30 years. So we cannot take this lightly, and anyone to take it personal if something is done wrong. We need to all understand that we have to do this the right way.
And it's very important as we start to bring this task force together within the Department of Public Works, the Complete Streets Task Force. It's very important for you, for your office, to be part of this task force, right? And other organizations like the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands, et cetera, to bring this focus on the work of the task force to make sure that we have good sidewalks. And talking about sidewalks, just now you mentioned that sidewalks last 30 years. Well, some of them last over 100 years, right? We look at the historical districts, especially in Christiansted, and all on King Street and on parts of Company Street, the sidewalks are terrible. Even for somebody who is much younger with no disabilities, it is hard to walk on these sidewalks without tripping. We have all of these historical bricks and historical stones, and then you have various historical preservation organizations here in the territory fighting to protect that. But is this a good part of our history? Is this a good part of our history that we want to preserve, a time when people with disabilities could not move about freely? And I think that the Americans with Disabilities Act needs to supersede, and in fact it does supersede because it is federal law. It needs to supersede any kind of historical preservation taking place here. And these sidewalks need to be made ADA compliant. What are your thoughts on that, Julian?
Oh, 100%. And it's something that, especially on St. Croix, there's, like you mentioned, downtown Christiansted, you could have something historically preserved, but if it's going to create barriers, that's where you have to come back and look at it and say, okay, we need to correct these barriers, because persons need to be able to. A person who's blind with a white cane, you're telling them, just stay away.
Yes.
You're not even to attempt, this is not for you. And as a government, there's 5 titles in the ADA. And Title III is places of public access. Title II is state and government. So I have to make sure that that if, especially like you have the forts, you have different historic items that we have, Christiansted or Frederickstead, that you have to make those things accessible. Mm-hmm. And if you can't physically, for instance, there's a cannon downtown Frederickstead in Fort Frederick, it's it would change the facade to make that accessible for a person to get up on top. But then you have to create a visual aspect for me to be able to look at that visual aspect and be able to enjoy that same view or experience that you would have physically that I could have visually. So even in areas where you can't make those physical changes, you still have to make sure that you put in place an option. You can't just say, well, sorry, it's historic and that's, the end of the game. So these are conversations that needs to be had. And I'm hoping that when the conversations are going on, that someone says, hey, we can't have this conversation without the ADA present. Because a lot of times if I'm not present, people will say, yeah, we're going to make it ADA compliant. But then you have to ask them, how are you going to make it ADA compliant? And then, that's where it gets silent because, it's easy to say that, but you need to know how you would do it.
Very important, not only for our residents, but also for our visitors, the tourists, the tourism is a very important integral part of our economy. And when the community is not ADA accessible, then we're destroying our tourism product. Even here in Christiansted, many times I see tourists being pushed in the street of Christiansted and King Street and Company Street because they cannot get onto the sidewalk at all. It holds up traffic, and most importantly, it's unsafe for those in wheelchairs and those helping them. So we have a lot of work to do in this area.
And one of the things I'm working on, and this is something that's going to be done in the fall, we kind of touched on it earlier, but it's going to entail a lot of work because it's territory wide. We're going to have a web page that's going to be a tourism website that's called Barrier Free. And what this does, it actually takes out the guessing work from you or I saying, okay, you could go to this restaurant or you can't go to this restaurant. They'll be able to go and see what transportation is available, what restaurants are available, what parks, beaches, whatever we have that's accessible, transportation, they all would be able to go on that web site of tourism and of the ADA and be able to not guess, but know, okay, these are all approved by the ADA office and they are accessible. They might, you have to have point system, so you might not have magnifying glasses for someone who's blind. So, but that doesn't make you not accessible. So we need to make sure that we give pointers to things that they might not have. But the access to it and people who go out and build their own ramps is so far from what they should understand about what a ramp should be and the specs that you should have. So I'm hoping that, as we work towards doing this, that persons turn to my office if you need advice, if you need printouts of what the guidance should be. That is what we want to do. We want to make sure that you're saving money, but you'll get in a position where people who wants to travel can go on that site and say, okay, this is a hotel that's accessible. It's not wheelchair accessible. It's disabled for disabled persons. That's two different type of hotel rooms. Mm-hmm. And hotels needs to know that because when you call, they say, oh yeah, we have an accessible room. I say, is the wheelchair accessible? And they say, yes, because there's a ramp to get inside. But then that's it. Accessibility ends. So, how do you feel if you travel from Seattle to the Virgin Islands and find out your hotel is not accessible? What do you do? So these are the things that people need to realize when you give this information. On the other line is someone who's scared and know that when I get there, I'm hoping and praying that everything is in place, that I can enjoy myself.
Great. Now, switching gears a little bit, we've been talking a lot about the streets and about sidewalks and other types of accessibility, for instance, hotel rooms. But there is also often a reluctance for employers to hire people with disabilities because of the lack of knowledge of their needs. How does your office assist business owners in understanding the ADA and the hiring of persons with disabilities?
Well, we've been doing a lot of trainings, roundtable settings with Disability Rights Center, and really bringing the small businesses out to, we've been working with Department of Labor and really educating the small businesses, because there are benefits in hiring persons with disabilities. There's a bill that was passed, but it's not enacted yet, that also gives another set of incentives and discounts to persons when they hire persons with disabilities. And so we want to generally help persons, because it's hard for you to imagine hiring a person who's blind. If I have an office and I say I'm going to hire someone who's blind, everyone is going to look at me like I'm crazy. But some of the persons who is blind is researchers for me that I turn to say, hey, I need you to look up this thing and send me an attachment of blah, blah, blah. And I talk to them just like how you and I are talking, and they do their things and get the information back. And that is some, to me, that's one of the reasons why when we start empowering individuals, you could start seeing how a person who's deaf, that I know is an accountant that works for a bank, and he's been there for 27 years. And you say, how does he? If you work with him, then you take down those barriers, because you're afraid sometimes, oh, if I hire this person and I violate their rights, I might be terminated, I might be sued. So how do I, so then if you're questioning, if that question comes to mind, a lot of times you're reluctant in hiring that person. Keep in mind that one of the things that we did in my office, one of the first things that was accomplished was we realized that the government didn't have an accommodation form that accommodates people. If you came and applied for a job, that you have to make accommodations for, one, the interview process, and two, if I needed special software or other to be able to do my job, that you could then request that accommodation, and that should be granted based on the cost or whatever structurally changes that might be needed. But those are things that weren't in place, and we've opened up the doors. We've done trainings with all the HR managers and in the public, explaining the sometimes accommodations is only $300 or $400, but you're going to give a job to a lifer. They're going to be so happy to get that job that you don't have to worry about turning over and hiring someone else, because this person will really take that job and really appreciate having that opportunity. So it's important for us to really, to take steps in learning more about the abilities of person and not the disability of the person.
Well, Julian, we are out of time, and I hope that some of our listeners and viewers who have questions will contact your office within the Office of the Governor so that they may receive guidance and assistance. And again, thank you so much for being on our show, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
A pleasure.